Good day, everyone, and thank you so much for being here this beautiful Wednesday afternoon for Demystifying the Publishing Process, organized by the Black Mountain Institute. My name is Ucheoma Onwutuebe, and I'm a third-year MFA student here at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. And I want to start by thanking BMI's donors, Miriam Sherin, Beverly Rogers, the Rogers Foundation, and the College of Liberal Arts here at UNLV. After the conversation, we will take a few questions from the audience. So if you have one, please drop it in the chats. And also keep an eye on our website and all our social media pages for the complete details of all our spring programs. The University of Nevada, Las Vegas wishes to acknowledge and honor the indigenous communities of this region and recognize that the university is situated on the traditional homelands of the Nuwu Southern Paiute people. We offer gratitude for the land itself, for those who have stewarded it for generations, and for the opportunity to study, learn, work, and be in community with this land. We encourage everyone in this space to engage in continued learning about the indigenous people who work and live on this land since time immemorial, including the Las Vegas Paiute tribe and the Mwapu Band of Paiutes. So now I'll be introducing our speakers for today's event. And first I have Lee Tran. Lee graduated from Columbia University with a degree in creative writing and linguistics in 2014. She has received fellowships from McDowell, At Omi, and Yado. She's the author of House of Sticks, a memoir that was named one of the best books by Vogue and NPR in 2021. Hi, Lee. Thank you. And next I have Tajja Isen. Tajja is a writer, editor, and voice actor. Her first book, Some of My Best Friends, was published in 2022 and was named a Best Book of the Year by Electric Literature, The Globe and Mail, CBC Books, and Daily Hive. She's the former editor-in-chief of Catapult magazine and has also edited for The Walrus, where she's currently a contributing writer and Electric Literature. Tajja also has a reading at the Beverly Theatre on the 2nd of February this Friday. Please do well to register. Hi, Tajja. And lastly, I have Talia Lakshmi Kolluri. Talia is a mixed South Asian American writer from Northern California. Her debut collection of short stories, What We Fed to the Manticore, published by Tin House in 2022, was longlisted for several awards and was a finalist for the 2023 Carol Shields Prize for Fiction. Hi, Talia. First, I want us to begin with each of you giving us like an abridged version of your publishing journey. Like, how was it, the who, what, when, how did it happen for you? So I'll start with Lee.
Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you so much for having me. Oh gosh, it's hard to do an abridged version, but I'll try my best. So 2013, I'm studying fiction at Columbia University, and I realized that I don't have enough credits to graduate by the following year. So I have to take this outside course at NYU, and it's a nonfiction course, and a bit outside of my wheelhouse, but I give it my best shot. And I just love my professor, Saeed Serafazadeh, incredible memoirist, essayist, and excellent professor. So I thought, why don't I share with him a bit of my writing? I emailed him some writing and he said, I'm sorry, I can't take a look at this because this is a seminar, not a workshop, and it would be unfair to other students. And so I was crestfallen, but then he sent a follow-up email saying, why don't you come to my office hours and we can chat about your goals as a writer? So I do, and I tell him, I'm working hopefully one day on a novel loosely based on my life. And he says, what's so special about your life? So I give him my life in a nutshell. And he looks at me and says, Lee, that's a great story. I totally highly support it. And best of luck. I go home and I'm pretty happy with how that conversation went. And the next day or the next week, I receive an email from his agent saying, "Dear Lee, Saeed forwarded us your pages. Here's the contract. We'd love to represent you." And, I was so green at the time, I thought it was a scam. I didn't even know that writers needed agents. I hopped on the phone with Saeed and I said, what is this? Is somebody hack into my email? And he said, "No, that's my agent. Congratulations. This is huge." And so, I meet up with his agent's co-agent, and she said to me, "Lee, this is a fantastic story, but it must be a memoir." Keep in mind, I'm studying fiction at the time. But I thought, sure, what's the difference? Fiction, nonfiction, whatever. And so that's kind of jump-started my journey into publishing. And I asked her, "Could you give me one more year to graduate? And then I'll work on a proposal with you." And that's what I did. So 2014, I spent about 6 months crafting this proposal, and trying to learn a completely different beast, because nonfiction is a bit different from fiction. There are all these parameters that you have to stay within. And I submitted the proposal, and in 2014, I got my book deal. And the next 6 years I spent working on this book, trying to gain the distance to tell my story. And throughout the process, a number of things happened that, really sort of prolonged the journey. My editor left the imprint, and so my manuscript was what is known in book speak, orphaned. And so it took quite a few months to find a new editor and really try to jive with that editor. But I think ultimately the time that it took to work on this was also, it gave me the opportunity to gain distance from my story. And the book really benefited greatly from that.
Thank you very much, Tajja. Can I hear yours?
Okay. Thank you for organizing this, and to all of you for being here. So my entry into publishing, I feel like for a long time I imagined the publishing world as this hermetically sealed sphere, which in so many ways it can still feel like, and I was just trying to kind of poke my way in via multiple paths. I guess I started in earnest in 2017, with pitching my writing to various publications. I had published a few short stories before that in very tiny literary journals, but 2017 was around the time I started getting interested in thinking about writing as a thing that one did more in public, more for an audience. And it was still a rather lively time on the internet for the personal essay. That was kind of how I got my start, was by placing pieces in outlets like Electric Literature, Bitch Media, Long Reads. And I was doing a lot of kind of figuring out what worked as I went along, figuring out who I was, what my particular bugbears were. And I got very lucky in various different ways. At the time I was still in graduate school. I was in law school, but knew pretty clearly that practice wasn't something I was interested in. So after I graduated, I applied for an editorial fellowship at The Walrus, a Canadian magazine. It's based in Toronto, where I lived at the time. So, because I knew I was also interested in editorial side work. So I had this fact-checking fellowship. I was placing essays when and where I could. And I started meeting people. One of the first places that I published was Catapult Magazine. And the editor-in-chief at the time, Nicole Chung, very kindly offered me a freelance contributing editor position. And through that, I got to work with writers like Amy Brady, who I started developing an anthology book project with called The World as We Knew It, which is an anthology of personal essays of writers' experiences with climate change. And it was originally with that project, neither Amy nor I were agented at the time. And it was originally with that anthology proposal that we went out and started looking for representation. And both of us had solo projects as well. I was kind of, loosely putting together this idea for an essay collection of my own. And we wanted to make sure that whoever we signed with was interested in representing us, our work more broadly, not just this anthology. So we signed with an agent in kind of mid-2019, sold the anthology at the end of 2019, and then I polished up my proposal for my essay collection that became Some of My Best Friends, and sold that in about a year later in late 2020. And sort of during that time, I was also kind of getting deeper into editorial work and working as an editor at various places. So that was also very much a part of my publishing journey.
Thank you so much. And Talia.
These are great stories about publishing journeys, and I'm so glad to be here. Thank you to everyone for coming. I had a bit of an unconventional experience in my book finding its way to a press. I write short fiction, and the advice that everyone gets when they write short fiction is you should try to place your stories in literary journals and see if you can build a writing resume. So I did that, and I got rejected a lot. The oldest story in my collection was published. I mean, it took me about a decade to write the collection. And the oldest story in the collection was published in the Minnesota Review after it had been rejected about 63 times. Lucky number 64 was the Minnesota Review. And it was very, very thrilling, very exciting. And after that point, maybe every other year or every 3 years, I would place a story in a literary journal. And during that time, I was kind of building what felt like a cohesive collection of short stories around the theme of pieces narrated from animal perspectives. But I felt that there were not a lot of publishers that were interested in that point of view. And so I just sort of thought that I would continue to find little homes for them in journals, and that would kind of be where they would live. But I started to think that when I had a cohesive collection, that maybe I would try to submit them to contests where you could publish a whole book. And so I started thinking about that in, I want to say, around 2020. I started thinking maybe I'm ready to start submitting to contests. So I submitted my I submitted an excerpt to Dorothy Books, and I got a very, very friendly rejection, which was super exciting because they're amazing. But I thought, okay, well, maybe I'll just try a couple of others and then maybe try to write something longer. In the meantime, I had a fourth story from the collection. I think a total of 4 were published before I got an offer. A fourth story was published in a literary journal called The Common. If anyone has read The Common, I highly recommend it. It's place-based writing. They do a lot of work in translation. They build their issues around a theme, and they're based in at Amherst. Such a wonderful journal. I love them so much. And I had been rejected from them several times, but every time they had said, you should try to send something else. So I sent something, and they accepted my story. And when it was published, I was really proud of it. They were wonderfully supportive of the story. And just a couple of months after it came out, I got an email from someone named Elizabeth DeMeo. Turns out she is an editor at Tin House, and she emailed me and said, I really like your story. Do you have a book? And I thought, wow, that's let's see if I can put together a book. So I emailed her and I said I had 7 stories. Does that count as a book? So she said, send them to me and let's see what you've got. And I thought, well, this is a great opportunity, wonderful opportunity to get the perspective of an editor. And I'm sure nothing will happen, but this is a great opportunity for me. So I sent her my 7 stories, and let's, just sort of cross my fingers, but thought that she's going to say no, and it's going to be a great lesson for me. But she said, that's not enough for a book, but we're kind of interested. So she asked me to revise a story based on notes and to write a new story because they wanted to kind of see if I could maybe expand my palette a little bit, but write a new story for the collection. And so I thought to myself, okay, this is another great opportunity, great chance to be edited by a real editor and a great opportunity to test myself to see if I can write on a short timeline, because I usually take a very long time to write things. But she's going to say no. She's going to say no, and it's not going to be a book, and it's okay, but this is such a great opportunity, so I'm going to do it. So I wrote a new story, and I revised a story, and I sent it back to her, and she said, "We'd like to buy your book." And so I immediately panicked because I did not have an agent at the time, and I didn't know anything about selling a book. And then I, in a panic, called several friends, and I said, "What do you do? What do you do if someone offers you a book and you don't have an agent?" And I was very fortunate because a really good friend of mine who lives 7 minutes away and is in my writing group said, "Oh, I just signed with an agent. Would you like to talk to mine?" And she very graciously agreed to read my 7 stories, or eight stories at that point. And she also agreed to take on me as a client, which was really, really, just really lucky. And then she was able to kind of negotiate selling my book to Tin House. And I wrote one more story for them, and the rest is sort of history. I'm abbreviating a lot, but I think the underlying theme that I hope to be able to highlight today is I was very well nurtured by small journals who believed in my artistic vision, who were deeply supportive, and who enthusiastically promoted my work. And so that helped me find a place at a press that did the same. I saw a question, actually. I could have sold the book without the agent. I just felt very uncomfortable with a contract without someone to guide me. So I wanted some help. I wanted someone to help me kind of understand how that would work. But yeah, I think that I just was really nurtured by small journals.
Well, thank you so much. And I think my next question is the advice on choosing an editor. And I know, Lee, we've had this personal conversation, but I would want you to share your wisdom with the rest of us. Like, what's your advice? Because I know you had like a peculiar journey where you had one editor and then you had to pick another one. But yeah, what was your advice in choosing an editor?
Absolutely. Well, I think, choosing an editor, it's a difficult journey. You really need to find someone who shares your overall vision for the project. And it has to be, it's a relationship you have to nurture. And you also have to, over time, as the book progresses, the narrative will tell you what it wants to be. And sometimes the vision gets a little bit lost, and then you have to renegotiate that relationship towards the end. And so you really need somebody who will really advocate for you, and who will give you the flexibility to change your vision along the way. Now, my first editor was just incredible. She and I really saw eye to eye. But unfortunately, because she had gone to a different imprint, I felt like, oh my goodness, how am I going to make this work with somebody else? Because I thought that I had found, my soulmate of an editor. But Scribner, my imprint, found a different editor for me a few months down the line. And the new editor inherited my manuscript, which is it's a different process when an editor inherits your manuscript, because they weren't in the room when the deal was made. So my task then was to really convince this editor what my vision was, and to make sure that she was with me, aligned with me along the way. And there were some difficult conversations. There were times when I had a vision, she had a vision, and it was this really funny process where she would sort of X out a certain part of my manuscript, and in the next iteration, I would slyly put it back in. And then she'd return it to me with that part X'd out. And this is kind of like unspoken dance. But eventually we did see eye to eye. There was a compromise. I kind of deconstructed that part. And so it made its way into the manuscript, but deconstructed. And yeah, I really love the way that my book turned out. And she became a huge champion of the manuscript in-house, it makes all the difference when you have that sort of support in-house. And she can convince the rest of the team, the marketing team, the publicity team, of the power of your story.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Tajja, do you want to share yours?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny, being an editor, I thought I knew what that relationship was like and what it took. And I did to an extent, but I only edited short form. So I was, working with like hundreds of different writers over, a given period. And then they were, very meaningful relationships, but they were short and quick and kind of casual. And like choosing an editor for your book is like, I mean, Lee said, it's like, it's a long-term relationship. Like it is a deep, important, special relationship. And if you are in a position to be fortunate enough to choose, I think, my advice would be very similar to what I was getting at with signing with an agent, which is you want to find somebody who is invested in you as a writer, who not just shares your vision for this book and is excited about this book, but I think has, cares about you as an artist and potentially where you will go next. I don't think that's always an easy thing to find, but I think it's incredibly valuable. And I think, it'll shape the way that editor touches the first book that you work on together. If they're not just sort of in it in a kind of flash in the pan way, like, oh, I can sell this. This is a hot topic. And if I'm being perfectly honest, it's not something I have always gotten right. I have not always been able to tell the difference between an editor who, is interested in a kind of long-term growth relationship versus one who thinks more in terms of like the marketability of this individual project. Yeah, that's I guess my biggest piece of advice.
Oh, thank you, Talia. I know you had like a peculiar story, but what would be your advice to someone who is like in that dilemma of choosing the right editor?
Yeah, I do agree that if you're in the position where you can choose, that's very, very lucky. I don't know how it works in a lot of publishing houses, but I suspect sometimes it's like almost like the editor will be matched with you or choose you. I feel like in my situation, my editor chose me, but I think if I had been uncomfortable with our interaction, I probably would have said no, thank you. And I to all of the emerging writers on this event, I just want to say that I know it can feel very, very intimidating to be contacted by an editor, and you might feel like this is my only chance and I have to go with the first person. But believe in the power and value of your art, and believe that the right person is there for you and the right editor is there for you. And it's okay to wait if you don't feel comfortable with them. I felt very comfortable with my editor because I felt that she wanted to amplify me. She did not want to rewrite me. And I think that is probably the most valuable quality in an editor is, as an artist, you want someone who believes in the value of your vision and your work and is there to help you realize it, not to make you reshape it. So I felt that she very much understood and valued what I was doing. And it is a very intimate relationship, right? They know they're like on the inside of your most personal thoughts. They see I always say she sees the inside of my brain. I think also another thing to consider about an editor is someone who is adaptable to their writers. I was talking to mine last year and I was telling her, it's so exciting to have you as an editor because I feel like the way you communicate is the best fit for me. And how lucky that we found each other because you communicate in a way that I'm able to hear. And she says, and I said, that's so amazing. And she goes, oh, I talk to all my writers differently. And so she changes the way she edits and communicates based on the needs of the writer, which I thought was really amazing. And I think that's a skill that I didn't realize was so important. It turned out to be very important to me. I'll give you an example, actually. One of the stories in my collection, in fact, the oldest story, I rewrote significantly for the book. It's very different from its first published iteration. And the way she gave me notes on that is we had a call and she says, I feel like this story has a lot of pieces in it that are echoed by your more recent stories. And I wonder if we need to go in a different direction. That's all she said. And I was like, oh, okay, I know what to do. And I completely rewrote it. And that was it. Those were the notes. I think we need to reimagine. So I changed the point of view. I amplified the voice. The bones stayed the same, but I felt like she just sort of said, I think we need to reimagine. And then she left it open for me to do that. And that was so wonderful. So also, I just want to do a pitch for independent presses where there are fewer editors and they're all very, very invested. If you want to submit your book to Tin House, I think it's a great place. I love them so much. So.
Well, thank you so much, Talia. Since you're still speaking, I would ask you this. How did the experience of publishing your debut match up with your expectations?
Oh, was really exceeded them quite a lot. I thought that my book would be published and 2 months of my life would be related to the book, and then everything would go back to the way it was and nothing would change in my life at all. And I also thought that basically, as long as 201 people bought it, that would be enough, because I figured I could sell it to 200 friends, and then that's all I could do by myself. So once you get to 201, you're done. That's it. So but I feel like it changed my life almost entirely. It was what felt like a really transformative experience. I just so many generous readers, and I just am really grateful for all of the support I got from my cohort, the debut cohort 22, 23, and all of my friends and my community. And I made a lot of new friends. That was probably the best part. Made so many new writing friends, which is just the most, it's really magical. I had a great time. I also got to meet a lot of literary idols. So yeah, that was really exciting. It was very exciting.
Thank you. Tajja, what about you?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I had no idea what to expect, but I also think the process of publishing a book is sort of designed in such a way that you are almost primed to expect everything. It's like a cannonball, it's like, we are going to launch this book and we don't know what's going to happen, but ideally this book is going to break every record. It's going to get every review. It's going to sell out in every store. And so I think to a certain extent, there's always, especially if, you don't know a whole lot about the industry going into the first, publication process, which I did not, there's always kind of a process of reconciling the expectations with the reality. And I think the things that the gifts that this book has given me are often not the ones that I was expecting. As Talia just mentioned, like the way that it sort of, it felt like it kind of ushered me into a literary community in a new way, both in terms of the writers that I was able to meet as a result of publishing it, and the readers that I was able to meet as a result of publishing it. The opportunities to travel were really wonderful. I mean, I was not like, I was a debut author of an essay collection. I was not sent on any big tour. But, even the fact that publishing that book was able to take me to Vegas now, where I'm doing this fellowship with Black Mountain Institute is such an incredible gift. And I think that sort of understanding the book as an inflection point in what I hope will be a longer career, rather than the cannonball, like this thing will come out and will be a huge splash and then on to the next thing. That's been a big difference for me, and it's been a good difference. Like I'm grateful for that sense of kind of momentum and arc and longevity that I don't think is really the way we talk about or position, or by we, I mean like the publishing industry talks about or positions debut books.
Well, thank you so much. Lee?
Yeah, I really envy Talia's expectations there. And I mean, it's just so lovely that you had this beautiful experience. And, I think my journey eventually brought me there, but much to Tajja's point, the way it's set up, it's truly, there is and the cannonball analogy is perfect. And for me, especially the pitfalls of getting a book deal very early on, especially in nonfiction, where you don't need a manuscript to sell your book, you just need the proposal. And so I had 2 chapters written and I sold it, and I thought, wow, how lucky I am. I was young, just starting out. I knew nothing about publishing. And it was a blessing. But in other ways, it was a curse in that there was now this value that was placed on my work, a monetary value. And so my task was to get my writing to match that monetary value, because I thought that there was a way to equate the two, which is, obviously not the case and not what one should do, but inevitably that's how it turned out. And then I had, the unfortunate prolonging of the process. And so with each year that passed, my expectations were built up, because I thought, well, I've been working on this for years. It has to amount to something. It has to be this massive bestseller. It has to be, something really big. Like Tajja says, selling out in every single bookstore, all of these things, because that's sort of how we're primed. And the language that surrounds this process too, we're going to single your book out of all the other books that are being published. And so for me, when I look back on my journey, I feel like I was on this little boat, this raft that I constructed out of nothing, coming from immense poverty, not really having a network, not knowing anything about the publishing industry. And yet I made this boat, and I was sort of just rowing it down these really narrow channels, treacherous. It was getting bumped against rocks and cliffs and boulders, all these things. And there were holes, but my goal was to make it out onto the open sea. That was what publishing represented to me, this open sea of opportunity. And I thought, once I get there, everything is going to change. My entire life will change, and so I finally make it out. My book is published in 2021. And I look around and there are these yachts, I make it out onto the open sea and there are these yachts that are just there, people having fancy literary luncheons and dinners and, rubbing shoulders with giants. And I'm just here, I'm being invited, but I'm also like, but my boat, I'm gonna drown, I've got a boat, I've got one hand on the hull, trying to attend these luncheons, but having to repair something that was deeply broken within me, as a result of this process, as a result of reconciling expectation with reality. And, I spent the last 2 years repairing my boat. And now that it's repaired, I look around me and I see these beautiful sunrises and these beautiful sunsets. And that is akin to, readers' reactions to my book, all these wonderful emails that come in. And it reminds me, this is what I was writing for. This is why I truly embarked on this journey to get to this ocean. I don't know if that makes sense. It's a very wacky metaphor, but
No, no, thank you so much for that. And my next question actually echoes what you're talking about, Lee, and that is, what do you wish you knew ahead of time that could have prepared you for this journey?
Yeah, that's a great question. You go into it expecting, you read these stories, but they're sort of outdated stories about what publishing looks like, this incredible relationships with editors, yeah, I remember reading the story about Douglas Adams' editor who, booked a hotel room for him and the editor. And he said, I'm going to chain you to this hotel room and you have to write your book. And I thought, ooh, that sounds like such an intimate relationship. I would love that with my editor. But that's just not how the landscape is currently. Editors these days have to wear so many different hats. And so, they're overworked, they're tired. And so, I wish that I was sort of given a heads up that, there's a lot of work that you must do on your own. Not as much hand-holding as I would have liked, but it made me grow as a person. And then there's this aspect of social media that, I don't know about you, Talia and Tajja, but I did not know that I had to do any promotion. But it really, these days, some agents really look at your social media following. to see, you know, are you marketable in that sense? And so you have to make a choice when you're published. You have to really kind of put on a persona, and it's a choice that I have actively rejected, which is why I'm not really anywhere on social media. But yeah, I wish I would have known that. I don't know if anything would have changed, but it would have been nice.
Thank you so much. Tajja, what about you? What do you wish you had known before embarking on the journey of publishing?
I mean, my answer, I think, is quite similar to Lee's in the sense that I wish I knew how much of the onus was placed on the writer to sell their own book. Lee, I love the boat analogy. I love the like getting out onto the open sea and looking around and seeing the yachts. Like I also had a sort of spatial analogy that I used to understand the publishing process, and similarly, it was a tunnel. It was a tunnel that was sort of, you know, entirely blacked out. I had this sort of weak sputtering little flashlight, and the flashlight only illuminated a few steps ahead of me at the time at once. And so, and you know, I was coming to this as somebody who had like worked around, if not in, the publishing industry, who had written about the publishing industry, and I was still kind of staggered by how little I felt I could see ahead of me in the tunnel at one time. And I think like I knew that there would be a certain degree of self-promotion required. I just did not realize how much of a kind of load-bearing pillar of publicity and promotion it is. And to some degree, I think it's unfortunate that, you know, the kind of totality of the publishing experience or of the, you know, of the conveyor belt is only apparent once you come to the end of it, because looking back, there's so many things I would have done so differently. And that's also why events and conversations like this are so important, because, you know, even if you've sold your book and signed with the press and you have a release date and you have a cover and there is still so much that is shrouded in mystery.
Thank you. Talia, what about you?
You know, I think the part that I wish I had known more about is probably something that people still don't talk a lot about. So publishing a book is very exciting and it is very thrilling, and I'm so grateful for the experience I've had. But I think very few people talk about how it might sometimes feel a little frightening to see the difference between public self versus private self. I'm actually like a really introverted person, and I'm also a pretty private person. And so it was in a lot of ways, very disorienting to me to suddenly realize that a lot of strangers had read something that I'd written. And because even though I write from the point of view of animals and they're all narrated by animals, all of my stories are very personal. There's a lot of me in them, and sometimes it's a little bit intimidating to know that there are people who have read them, and I don't know anything about the person who's read what I wrote, but they now know something very significant about me. And so reconciling that feeling of having a public self and what does that mean was something I kind of wish I had been a little bit more prepared for. I don't think I would have done anything differently, though. I think I just would have been less surprised by the feeling. Yeah, I feel like there's an AWP panel in there somewhere.
Well, thank you so much. And, you know, as emerging writers without book deals and whatnots, we actually approach the publishing conversation with a lot of hunger. So my next question is, what advice do you have for people who are looking for book deals? Are there like red flags they should look out for? And yeah, what advice do you have for people looking for book deals? So I'll start with you, Tajja.
Yeah, I think my advice would be to know, like, this is part of faithfulness to one's own vision. I think know how far you are, know where your limits are, know how far you are and are not willing to compromise certainly on your vision for the book and what you want the book to look like, but also I think it's, potentially worth thinking about the other subjects we've been talking about too, like the public versus private persona thing, or the, who do I want to be on social media? Do I want to be on social media at all thing? Like, I don't think those kind of, those secondary soft factors should stop you from going after what you want. I think, the book is the most important thing, the material is the most important thing, and your confidence in and fidelity to it is the most important thing. But I think going in armed with that extra little bit of information will only help you in finding the best person to represent you, finding the best person to edit your book, sussing out what kind of publishing house would make you feel most supported and most at home.
Thank you so much. What about you, Lee?
Tajja, I couldn't have said it better myself. Yeah, I mean, knowing your limits, that's such a, I mean, it almost sounds discouraging, but also, I mean, you have no idea how many times I'm approached by, aspiring writers who have never taken a workshop before. And they say, well, I want to write about my life. Here's my manuscript. And I think, okay, well, first, writing is a craft. It's something you must study. And so you really, yeah, I highly recommend those out there who want to be writers. If you have not taken a writing workshop, take a writing workshop, learn the craft, work your way into its secrets, and really hone it before you start looking for representation. And then from there, yeah, being faithful to your vision. There will be so much rejection to the point where you question yourself. There's going to be so much self-doubt. I mean, I spent 6 years sort of in a corner of my room, pulling my hair out, crying, thinking, did I make the wrong choice? Was I meant to be a writer? But ultimately, it will force you to really confirm to yourself what it is that you want out of this art form, what it is, how you want to move through the world through this venue. And yeah, just keep going, keep believing in yourself, but you must do, the work to hone your craft.
Thank you so much. What about you, Talia?
Red flags. I think that there's actually something I saw in the chat that I want to reference as well, but red flags would be if one thing to watch out for, maybe if a publisher is promising you something specific, because I think the publishing industry is very unpredictable. So it's hard to know if they can actually produce a specific outcome. But I did see someone in the chat mention that they have been advised not to talk about, in this particular instance, it was not to talk about Palestine. And I would say I probably personally wouldn't be comfortable with a publisher who told me I could not use my platform as an artist to talk about things that are important to me. I think that staying true to your work is very, very important. And I think as artists, like, our platform is often very valuable in speaking about things that matter to us. And there's a writer recently, she actually pulled away from her German publisher. She wrote a book called Catch the Rabbit. I'm going to mispronounce her name. Unfortunately, her name is Lana Bastasic, I think is how you pronounce it. But she pulled away from her publisher because they were being silent on the issue of Palestine, and that was unacceptable to her. And I think that's commendable that she stepped away from her publisher to stay consistent with her values. And so I would say stay away from a publisher who tells you to compromise your values, for sure. Yeah, so yes, stay true to your artistic vision, and stay true to what feels right to you as a person and as a writer.
Okay, I have this question from Lisa Story, and they ask, what questions or conferences do you believe, what workshops or conferences do you believe are the most helpful, particularly for unpublished writers? So Inoli, you mentioned some writers who have never been workshopped, so perhaps I'll direct this question to you.
Okay, this is a bit of a shameless plug, but I teach with the Sackett Street Writers Workshop. So for anybody who's looking to learn the art of memoir and personal essay, I think that's a fantastic place to start. you could do an MFA program.
Mm.
There are plenty of low-res MFA programs, some really excellent one, the Iowa Writers Workshop. And so, yeah, just do research. You know, Ucheoma and I met at an artist residency, Yaddo. And so also you submit your work to residencies and see if they accept you. You know, the MacDowell colony or MacDowell residency accepted me when I was, you know, nowhere on my journey yet. And so you never know. But the key thing is to believe in yourself enough to invest in your craft.
Thank you so much. And I think, Tajja, this question is for you. Is it possible to have sold a book without an agent? And if you have questions, please drop them in the chat. But yeah.
That question was for me specifically?
Yeah.
I think, I mean, it's certainly possible. I would advise writers certainly to seek representation before selling a book. And also a lot of publishers will prefer that you are like that. They won't look at submissions that are unagented. And even if they do, like if they say they scope your writing out in a journal and say, oh, I really want a book from this person. I think, sorry, I just got distracted by the chat. Even if they see you writing in a journal and, you know, reach out and get in touch with you and say, hey, you're working on a book, they will quite often want to help put you in touch with an agent, because it's just sort of better for both parties if the writer is represented.
Oh, thank you so much. One question here. Is it worth it to get an MFA if you have to pay for it? I heard people say not to go if it's not fully funded. I don't know if any of us has an MFA here, but the question is it worth it to go if it isn't fully funded?
I could chime in really brief if that's okay. I don't have an MFA, but I did have a lot of educational debt from a different degree. So I chose not to get one because I felt that I was already up to my eyeballs in debt and I needed to work to pay it down. And so I did what Lee mentioned, which is I went to a ton of workshops. I went to the Tin House Summer Writers Workshop 4 times. And through that workshop, I met a lot of wonderful friends who are people that I trade my work with still. And then I joined a local writing group. And I think that any environment where you have access to other writers at your same stage, peers who can offer you critical feedback with kindness, it can help you grow as a writer, even if you're not in an MFA program.
And I have this question. What are recommendations for finding an agent? Does anyone want to answer that?
Yeah, I can take a first pass. I mean, I think one place to start is like one sort of easy place to start is in the acknowledgement sections for books that you see yourself as sort of being you know, comparable to in, you know, you can interpret that however broadly you might like, but basically just finding the people who represent work that is, you know, vaguely similar to yours. There are also formal resources, listings, databases like Poets and Writers. I feel like there's a big one that I'm totally blanking on right now that's like updated annually. Can somebody jump in and let me know if
And
Yeah.
if someone says query tracker, I think that's where you can get like the bios.
Query tracker is another one, yes.
Yeah. Okay, while we're still waiting for more questions, I'll ask you guys, is any of you working on a second book? Is it in the same genre of your debut? Why and why not? Talia, you can go first.
I'm laughing because I'm trying to write a novel for the first time. And it's really intimidating. And I've been starting and stopping for like 5 years already. oh, actually probably more than that because the pandemic skewed my perception of time. But yes, I am writing something new-ish. It's a novel and it is in the same family. It's still animal or oriented and addresses things like climate change and so forth. I am doing an writing accountability partnership with a friend this year where we report our word counts at the end of the week. And that's helped me keep a good momentum.
Thank you. Tajja, what about you?
I am working on a second book. So my first book was an essay collection that was a hybrid of personal narrative and research and cultural criticism. So the personal was just kind of one strand among many. But the next project that I'm working on is a memoir. Because coming out of some of my best friends, that was the space I was really I really felt energized by and was most excited to go back to. So the book I'm working on right now is called Tough Love. It's about mentorship, both my own tendency to kind of fall into and seek out complex, intense mentorship bonds, and also the way that relationship gets represented in culture and the role that it plays in the stories we tell about power and ambition and success.
Right. Lee, what about you?
What am I not working on? I feel like I've got like so many projects, but I am working on a screenplay of my memoir just because why not? And I'm returning to my first love, which is fiction, and trying my hand at novel writing. And so my novel will be an epistolary novel. It's going to be about an agoraphobic mother-daughter duo. And the daughter is coming of age and yearning to see the outside world. And she has this relationship with an anonymous pen pal until the letters stop coming one day. And that becomes a catalyst for this young girl to, go outside for the first time and explore the world and sort of pluck up that courage. And, it's a metaphor for the loneliness that I feel our society is experiencing, this pandemic of loneliness. And so it's a theme that I really want to explore in my art, and yeah, we'll see where it takes us.
Well, I wish you all the best with that. And I have one more question. It says, how do we figure out which are the right literary magazines and journals for our writing? Do you have any general advice for navigating that process? Talia.
Oh, that's such a great question because I think I didn't follow the advice I'm about to give in the very beginning. The standard advice that I think is actually really good, I came around to it, which is try to read a lot of literary journals and get a sense of what they like to publish and try to target your submissions as much as possible. I found that really overwhelming in the beginning, so I just sort of I called it my scorched earth technique, which is I submitted to everybody who had an open submission. And I think that means that I submitted to a few places that were a terrible fit for my work. But when I started to get a better sense of who was receptive and who was not, I was able to winnow that list down to about 20 to 30 different journals that I think were reasonable. So I think the best way to find them is to go to the Best American Short Stories and look at the back and see who is submitting their stories to that anthology series. My caveat is that often the stories that make it into the anthology itself come from a very small selection of journals, but the stories that get listed as notable come from a much wider selection. So I would start with maybe the journals that are on the notable stories list, and you'll find some really, really wonderful ones. I have my personal favorites. You may end up having yours, but that's a great place to find them. And if you have a short story writer whose work you really admire, looking to see who has published that writer is another way. It's a way that I've kind of narrowed my list down. And then if you are kind of someone who has been submitting for a while and getting maybe some more personalized rejections, then keep a list of the places that have told you to submit again, because when they say it, they mean it. They do want to see your work again. So build your own spreadsheet once you have started receiving some responses.
Tajja, as someone who has edited magazines, what would you What would be your answer to this?
I would echo the advice about reading the outlet where you hope to pitch to, even if you're not reading, like I understand that it can be sort of intimidating advice to be like, read every literary journal in existence and like make a spreadsheet. But I think, having a good sense of the work that the outlet publishes is really important. I think, my advice will be slightly different because it's not sort of like, I think it's a little different for sort of digital only magazines, especially ones that like Catapult did publish occasionally sort of more topical work. But I think as much as you can, try to write to an editor directly rather than pitches at publication.com, because those are not always sort of monitored as diligently as I think they should be. And the other I had one more thing. Submit simultaneously. I feel like places are pretty good at, disclosing their policies around simultaneous submissions, but if they don't, I would still assume that it is broadly permissible, but it's good to disclose. Let the editor know in a little line in your mini cover letter that that's what you're doing.
Thank you. And the last question I'll say before you, Lee, since this pertains to your journey, do you have any advice on how to submit a non-fiction proposal for a memoir?
That's a great question. My proposal was something I worked on with my agent. But the elements of a proposal is something I can shed light on, which is, it's a synopsis essentially of the project you plan to submit to publishers. And you do have to do some market research. You have to sort of within the proposal say, my book is very similar to X, Y, and Z, but this is what makes my book stand out amongst all these other books within the same category, same topic. And it has to epitomize your literary voice as well. So you really want to make sure that it's polished, and that it's, you've heard of the slush pile, right? So it has to really pop out. And I think editors will only take about, 2-3 minutes to look at something. And if the voice doesn't quite grab their attention, then, that's it. And so, yeah, I think it is something you might want to work on first and find an agent and then polish it with that agent, because your agent is essentially the first editor really that you find, unless you hire, outside of that. But at least that's how my journey unfolded for me.
May I jump in and just add something as well? Yeah, the book proposal is kind of a fascinating genre. It is a very formalized document. There are a lot of good resources out there, like Courtney Baum's Before and After the Book Deal does a good job, I think, breaking down what a proposal does. I will also say that I'm so interested in this genre that I'm doing a virtual panel with Black Mountain Institute on crafting a book proposal. It's April 10th, so please keep an eye out for that, and we will get deeper into the nitty-gritty of what makes this genre so fascinating.
Wow. We are out of time. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to our wonderful panelists for your wisdom. And I feel like I'm ready to take the publishing world by storm. And yeah, for our audience, please keep an eye on BMI's website and our social media pages. We have like loads of exciting events for you lined up this spring, and hope to see you some other time. Goodbye.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Uche, for moderating.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. This was fantastic.
Yes, absolutely. Best of luck.
Thank you.